All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Wine, Women, and Words. I am Michelle, and with me, of course, is Diana.
Hello.
And that is a very early morning voice you just
It
had.
is. I'm not all the way down on my very, very large cup of coffee yet. But as the show progresses, I'll wake up more and I'll probably talk more. So it'll be an interesting experiment.
So, yes, we have a daytime episode. And I think, Emmy, I think you are our first Finnish author. We have
Mhm.
Emmi Itaranta joining us from Finland today. And we are going to be discussing her latest novel, The Moonday Letters. So thank you so much for making time for us and joining us today.
No, thank you. I really appreciate it, especially I know it's very early for one of you.
We have gotten so good at juggling time zones, but I think I was talking this morning to my mom, and I said I want to get a world map and hang it on a wall and put pins in the countries that we've interviewed authors from.
Mm.
So I think it would be an interesting experiment to see how many pins we'd have on the map. But we are here, of course, to talk about the Moonday Letters, which I am absolutely loving. I'm about halfway through, so I'm not done yet, but absolutely loving this novel. And for our listeners who may not be familiar with it yet, can you give us an overview of what it's about?
Yeah, so the Moonday Letters is a sort of space opera, which I never really expected to write, but it's a sort of space opera set in about 160 years from now in the future. And in the fictional future of the book, humans have colonized parts of the solar system. And Earth is not in very good shape at all. Climate change and various other environmental issues have made it a very difficult place to live. And the main character, Lumi, is a healer who grew up on Earth, but left Earth as a teenager to become a healer. She sort of took an apprenticeship with an older healer. And was able to leave Earth. And the book takes place when she's an adult. She's married to a person named Sol, who comes from Mars, and Sol disappears on a work trip. And Lumi starts looking for Sol around the solar system and begins to discover things about Sol that she didn't know before, and also discovers some things about her own past that she had never realized or really paid attention to before. So it's essentially about Lumi trying to find her spouse, and in the process also discovering new things about the relationship and herself.
Well, I did a little research rabbit hole while I was reading this book, and I got curious about some of the footnotes at the beginning. There are footnotes about how long a Martian day is, how long a day is on Mars, and I Googled, and this is like my nerd moment. I got so excited when I had this happen. I Googled how long a day is on Mars. And I discovered that a Martian day is called a sol. And I nerded out and was like, oh my God, that's their name. And so I looked up, I got curious about Lumi to see if Lumi meant something. And if Google Translate is correct, Lumi means snow in Finnish.
That's correct, yes.
So I love diving into character names and seeing where they came from. How did you land on these names for your characters?
I think Sol's name came to me first because I knew from the beginning that I was going to write a non-binary character. So I wanted to find a name that was sort of gender neutral or unisex name, at least in some languages. And I started looking into unisex names, and I discovered the name Sol, which I don't remember right now in which languages it is a unisex name, but there are several languages in which it is used for all genders. And because I also knew that it referred to the Martian day, and also, of course, is the name one of the names for the sun, I thought it would fit really well with this character and this story. Lumi's name was a little bit more difficult because I knew that she came from Finland, like me, and her name would have to be a Finnish name. But I wanted something that would also sound international enough and be easy enough to grasp if you're not Finnish. That's something I always think about because I write in English. So I always try to, but my stories are frequently set somewhere else than English-speaking countries, so, or even our own time and age. So I always try to create character names that are still easy enough to grasp and pronounce and follow, even if they're not English names.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that idea of using languages to carry another element of the character into their name like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually fascinated, if I could jump in for a moment.
Yeah, no, please. Diana's awake.
I'm fascinated by the fact that you said that you write in English. And we've talked to authors before where English isn't their native language, and oftentimes they'll write in their native language first and then translate it into English. How is it for you to write in English, which is not your first language?
Well, I mean, I actually write both in Finnish and English. So my process is not that I write the whole thing that I initially write the whole thing in one language in my native tongue, and then I translate the entire thing. But I write in parallel. So
Wow.
So the way it works is I usually write the first draft of each chapter in Finnish most of the time. Then I translate that one chapter into English before I move on to the next chapter. So I write the entire manuscript in parallel in two languages from the beginning to the end. So I feel that the interaction between English and Finnish actually shapes the writing. It will have an impact on my word choices, on the sort of sentences that I create. I'm not sure that it really has an impact on the story, but it definitely has an impact on the rhythm of the language. So I think it would be a different book if I wrote it in just one language, or if I wrote the entire thing first in one language and then translate it from the beginning.
Interesting. It's really interesting. Now, out of curiosity, are the Moonday letters published in Finnish by chance?
Yeah.
And did somebody else do the translation on that, or was that?
No, I wrote both the Finnish and English versions. I've done that with all my novels.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's obviously a very, very slow process. It's not something that I would necessarily recommend to anyone unless they feel that they really get something out of it. That is an integral part of the writing process, because it does take time and it is a lot of work.
It's just, that's so fascinating to me. And I think if I was fluent in two languages and I would be able to, and if I had that choice to do that, I think I would probably do the same thing. Because, translations are so fascinating to me, and having, and I know people who work as translators. So it's somebody translating your work, but then you have the opportunity to do your work in two languages, which is just like such a beautiful thing to be able to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I enjoy the process. Yeah, sorry.
No, you're fine. I was just going to say, I would imagine it also allows you to make sure that the story is exactly how you want it, so nothing gets lost in translation, or that it doesn't carry over into the other language exactly how you would want it to.
Yeah, I guess that's true to some extent, although I have also noticed that it can work the other way as well. So sometimes if I'm trying to express something and I cannot make it work in both languages, I might end up ditching that part altogether, because I feel that if I can't get it to work in both languages, then maybe it shouldn't be in the book. So it also might have the impact of sometimes I end up losing things that I would otherwise keep in there. Both ways.
So, and this book is, of course, written I'm going to get the word wrong. Epistolary, is that the right word when it's written in letters?
I think
Good
so.
job.
So, what are some of the challenges? Of course, this is, set in literally other worlds, other planets. And you have to do a lot of world building, which we'll get to in a second. But what are some of the challenges of building or of telling the reader what these worlds are like in
Oh.
letters, where presumably the other person who Lumi is writing to knows what the worlds are like because they live in them. So you don't have that, omniscient narrator being able to inform the reader.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. And that was actually something that I discovered early in the process of writing this book, that I couldn't make it 100% epistolary, because the first version I wrote was entirely nothing else except Lumi's letters to Sol. And then I realized that some of it didn't really make sense or was not really credible, because she was having to explain the technology and the science of the world and how that future world worked to someone who would already know these things. So when I started revising and working on the second draft, I decided to try adding some other things in. Like there are bits and pieces like sort of fictional news articles or excerpts from non-fiction books from the future that will give you some information about the world. And I felt that it was sort of necessary to bring those things in, because otherwise I would have Lumi explaining in a letter how the spaceship that she is on works to Sol, who either would know or would not care. And Lumi probably wouldn't know either, because if I get on a plane, I'm just on the plane. I wouldn't be be able to explain to someone why or how the plane stays in the air. So so I sort of had to find a different way of conveying that information to the reader. So what I discovered was that the epistolary form is quite limiting in some ways. I love it as a form. I always enjoy reading it, and I did enjoy writing it, but it sort of sets a certain limit that I had not really properly considered until I started writing it.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, definitely. And I really do. I enjoy one aspect of epistolary novels is you get those other forms of communication, the emails, the messages. I like the way that those can break up the text, and just, I think visually it's kind of fun for the reader to come across other forms of communication like that. Like the footnotes. I love the footnotes. I'm reading this on my Kindle, and on the Kindle you can tap on the footnotes, and when you see the numbers, and they pop up on the screen. And I was in a coffee shop with one of my friends reading, and I saw the first footnote, and I was like, "Oh, it has footnotes!" That's the nerd in me, just getting very excited. And so now we have to talk about the research, because I noticed through reading this and other science fiction novels that it's very similar to historical fiction, writing science fiction, in that you have to find the balance between fact and fiction. So, historical fiction, Diana is a historical fiction writer. She has to fill in the gaps of the past, but you have to fill in the possibilities of the future,
Exactly.
or another world. So, what kind of research did you do to build these other worlds in outer space?
For this book, I read a lot about the sort of if we were to build space colonies that would actually be livable, what sort of things would we have to take into account? What kind of what kind of technology would it require? What sort of conditions would people have to live in, etc. I read several books that talked about this, but obviously they all talk about this on a theoretical level because, as far as we know, no one has done it yet. So I can't even remember the book titles now. There was one that was called Packing for Mars. I can't remember who wrote it. It's sort of a lighter science book, but very, very interesting. And I read several others which talked about the same sort of if we try to colonize Mars, what will we need to, what will we need to think about? Also, I did read Kim Stanley Robinson's Mars trilogy because when it first came out, the science was, as far as I know, absolutely top notch. Now, of course, we know some things that may be a little bit different from when those books were written. So some of it might not apply today. But I was very impressed with his world building. So you could always believe that this is exactly how it could go. So fiction was important there as well. I think also that when you're doing research, it's always a good idea to read some fiction about the same topics that you're writing about to see how other fiction writers have approached it.
I'm muted. I forgot I was muted. That's one thing that Diane and I always love to talk about, is that reading is such an important aspect of writing. You have to do one in order to do the other.
Yes, precisely. I always tell people, when I do school visits or other events like that, and people ask me, so what would you tell to an aspiring writer? What do we need to, what advice would you give? I always say, to become a writer, you first have to be a reader. There's just no way around it, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's definitely, and to be able to see how other writers handle words, the wordplay and and patterns and rhythms. You can't always get that if you haven't read other books and seen other styles, and that helps inform you and how you are going to approach writing.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think one of my favorite characters, of course, now today is the one day, well, it's early. My cats are still asleep. But I love Ziggy, the cat. So how did Ziggy show up and insert himself in the novel?
Well, I've always had cats, and I'm a big cat lover, and I've always wanted to write a novel that had a cat in it, and I had not done that before. And I felt that as Lumi, the main character, is traveling through space, she's very alone. She doesn't really have anyone to talk to. And I felt that she needed some sort of a companion. And then this cat appeared and said, I want to travel. I want to travel with your main character. And I really love the idea of a sort of space traveling cat. So Ziggy just showed up and wouldn't leave. So now he's there traveling with Lumi. And of course, it's also connected to something else in the book. There is the the healers in the fictional world of the book have something they call soul animals. So they are like animal-shaped spirits. That's an idea that we know from many different cultures. It's not limited to one or two. Finnish culture has its own version of it. So the healers have this animal-shaped spirits that travel with them through life and help them. And because Lumi's spirit soul animal is a lynx, so a big cat essentially that is native to Finland among other Northern European countries. Lumi's soul animal is a cat, so I thought it made sense that she also had a sort of like a real life version of a cat traveling with her.
And oh gosh, I thought of another question and it just flew out of my head. That was what I was going to say. As far as, we talked a little bit about your research and the sources that you use to help you create your world, but what were some of the challenges of actually bringing those different, because Lumi visits several different places. She's traveling all over the universe, basically. How did you approach making each colony and each different planet or moon that she visits unique in its own way?
Well, I mean, I think those places just came to me, but sort of very intuitively. But I did also put some planning into it because I felt that each different colony will have a different history. It will have been shaped by who went there first, what language is spoken there, what are the sort of main cultural influences in that place, what sort of technology they've got available, plus the physical conditions. For instance, early on, she's talking about visiting Europa, which is a sort of faraway moon, and people there live under the ice crust that covers the oceans because that's the only way to survive on that moon. So obviously life there would be different from what it would be on Mars, where the colonies have been in place for a long time and are essentially self-sufficient and very sort of almost like luxury colonies compared to many other places. So I sort of wanted each of these colonies to have its own unique history and makeup in the sense of where it came from and who lived there. And I think that it made sense because when I'm reading science fiction or fantasy, it tends to annoy me if the very large science fiction or fantasy universe looks like it's practically the same everywhere. Everyone speaks the same language. Everyone has the same cultural customs. Everyone dresses the same way. The real world is not like that. So obviously a fictional world is not really very credible if it's like that either.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was trying to remember Europa's name because I thought one thing that really stood out to me when Lumi was there is how little details have huge impacts, like noise. Obviously, I may not have thought about that if I were writing something like that. That noise has to be below a certain decibel because if the glass cracks, then basically everyone is doomed.
Yeah.
So little details like that make such a huge difference and such an impact on how the characters interact with the place that they're in.
Yeah, thank you. I was really interested in all the details that sort of show the fragility of these colonies because they are all built from nothing, essentially. There was nothing before humans went there and everything had to be built from scratch, essentially. So what really struck me when I started thinking about this world was how fragile those places would be. And that's obviously also one of the major themes in the story, how fragile these sort of human-made environments in space are and how a very small thing can destroy them.
And what one scene, it's an early on scene, so it's not a spoiler or anything, Diana. But I just was really, it was the interview that Lumi watched Soul do at the symposium in, I can't remember now they were on Mars. And it was just kind of really sad in a way, or discouraging, that, you know, we've been able to, in that world, we've been able to set up, you know, colonies and worlds on other planets, and, you know, still haven't quite learned from some of the mistakes that we made on Earth before we had to actually go and live on other planets. So it was that, in that sense, there was that sense of realism and the fact in the fiction, kind of. So, but I thought that interview that Sol did was really interesting.
Thank you.
But I know we are just about at our half hour. So everyone, if you would like to get your own copy of the Moonday letters, please be sure to check out the link in our show notes, and you can order your copy from our bookshop on bookshop.org. As always, bookshop.org supports our wonderful writers. It supports the podcast, but most importantly, it supports all the wonderful indie bookstores out there. And Emmi, thank you so much. I know it's evening time for you over in Finland, so I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. And I hope you both have a really good day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for making time for us. We've had so much fun chatting with you.
Well, thank you. I mean, I didn't realize that it had already been half an hour. It just flew by. Thank you for the interesting.
Thank you so much. Have a great night.
You too. Well, a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.